Welcome to our school board interviews. I am Reverend Corinne Mack, president of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP. These interviews were done on an individual basis to allow you to hear directly from each candidate. Please take the time to listen carefully. But before I go any further, I must thank two phenomenal women, Ms. Annette Albright, who is our educational chairperson, and Mrs. Terrell Nichols, who is our political action chairperson. These women have done so much work to ensure that we elevate not only our children in the educational system, but this process. Please take the time to listen to every interview and make a decision as to who best serves you, your children, and your family. It's so important that we are involved in this process. This branch, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg branch, led the charge in the lawsuit against the state legislators for educational inequity, violation of the Land Grant Act. That lawsuit will directly change the lives for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and children at risk. Educational equity is imperative. We're talking about our children and their futures. And so the work that we do on a daily basis is to ensure that we have a just system. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you enjoy every interview. God bless you.
Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to present some of my views. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel of the Air Force, where I served as a fighter pilot in combat, and I also as a defense planner at the Pentagon, where I was instrumental in putting together the Air Force's weapons budget, which was a very large budget, which actually involved me briefing congressional staffers and Department of Defense officials. After my 20 years in the Air Force, I retired and went to a large corporation where I was able to manage two large, successfully $100 million programs. Later, we retired. My wife and I came down here to North Carolina and retired, and then I left retirement and taught high school for 10 years. Now, over the past year, I've been speaking out at the CMS school board about the invasion of woke culture into our schools. I'm convinced that this wokeism is the genesis of some of our dismal student performance and and safety issues. And of the 5 candidates for District 1, I'm the only one that is challenging this woke invasion. Now, what is this woke invasion? Quickly, it is essentially about tackling the sexual identity, things that are going on with the gender identity, which is confusing their moral compass and going away against traditional sexual morality that we grew up with. The next thing is that they are manipulating equity, which is a very important thing, and telling some children that they are victims and entitled. And when you do that, that loses their self-esteem and their will to improve themselves. And the last thing is not discipline, because the essence of all this is parental approval. And rather than saying opt out, for instance, a teacher or a parent may not know that this is going on, and so they won't even have the knowledge to be able to opt out. But if you require an opt-in, in other words, where all parents who want to have particular books as part of a reading requirement, that they would have to opt in. So, and that'd be the same thing on some of these different surveys that are more focused sometimes on gender identity and things like that. So the next part of that books that you're talking about, I would say that, hey, parents would have to approve the different books, and it could be, you could have books in the library that would be, say, okay, this part requires parent approval to be read. In other words, so the parents say, so it would be up to the parent to decide whether they want to read something that would maybe be a little bit risque or racy or whatever, and that way the parent has more control of what, because they're the one who is really the parent and the guardian are the ones that care most about that child. I hope that answers that. But it's not like book burning and pulling all these books out. No, make sure that the parents have control of what their children watch or listen to or read. Thank you. I think that is I think that's contrary to the truth. I mean, truth. Of course, people say, "Well, what is the truth? What is the truth?" But I think it's been pretty well established of what our historical background is, in particular in the framing of the Constitution, etc. So I don't think it's fair to the children to be taught things that are outside of that, which I think is going to create further problems downstream. Because if you look at a society, you want to have it structured and somewhat orderly. In other words, you want to have laws and things that people will say, these laws make sense, and therefore we will abide by them. There's a lot of biblical things to go back to that statement, but I think that's the key thing, is having the order. So if you come out and saying that this is not what happened in history, then you start to pull the pins or the foundation out from our overall society structure that we have been blessed with, it being over for 200 years of being a society like that, and then having all the people who want to come into the United States. I mean, because when I was in the marketing world at this big corporation, and even in the Air Force, I was going I ended up in 5 different continents in lots of different countries: South America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and Europe. And believe me, they really respect. This was years ago. Really respected what's going on in the United States. They want to come here because of the orderly fashion that we have in the United States. Unfortunately, those underpinnings are being pulled right and left because of this altered history, in my opinion. One of the aspects about the school bus problem, of course, is there is a lack of drivers is one of the things. And I noticed just driving down to my daughters to be with my, babysit my grandson a little bit. They have a high school and I think it's a high school and middle school that are very close to each other, and it just backs up the traffic. So that is a little bit of a problem. But I think if we can keep ourselves to more of a neighborhood schools where communities are built together, I think that's going to help solve a lot of that. Because I know that a lot of the the charter schools, don't do that. They have a lot of people who drive in, themselves. But at the same time, if you look at this from a neighborhood schools, I think if you could keep that type of a structure, that type of a mindset, I think you can reduce the number of buses that are going to be required. And at the same time, that you have to come back and forth and say, well, is that a safe school, or is that a good school that they're confined to? And that's where the issue comes up. Maybe you allow these parents to have an option out. In other words, can we provide them vouchers to be able to identify a different school to be able to go to? Well, the key thing about the buses, or all I mentioned about, is trying to hone in on a community school where there's a lot more ability to be able to get transported back and forth to school. Thank you. I know, for instance, at our school up there in this area, you got the Cornelius Elementary School and the North Meck High School, which are ones that are being, continually repaired, but they are, as I understand, if they get a bond together, that they will be able to maybe to rebuild those schools. But I know, just as a homeowner, and that a lot of times less money is spent if you're repairing an existing building. And assuming that it's not totally dilapidated, but oftentimes that it actually gets you a better, I want to say, bang for your buck. In other words, you get a better return on your dollar. New schools, require different lands and et cetera like that, and those are going to be a little bit more. It's going to take more dollars to be able to do that. So if I would lean toward trying to refurbish existing schools, and then when you get to a point where they are, like for instance, like a car, you get to a point where you're diminishing returns on getting the car repaired, and that's where he says, "Hey, we gotta get a new car here," and go with that. But at the same time, there may be other facilities that could actually operate as schools. So I'm not sure how much we look at that, because I know I was taught at a private school, and there they actually did that. They looked for schools that we could use for a period of time while the funds were able to get collected to build a new school. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Of course, that was the problem came up because they no longer, if I recall, the state no longer funded that. So that's going to have to be, where are those funds going to come from? And you start scratching your head, because that's an important thing, particularly for some poor families that need that. And what I would think about, because if you look at where we're spending money, quite frankly, I have questions about all the money we're putting into the social and emotional learning. I think that money and these expensive surveys that we're doing, that money may be better spent on feeding the children, because from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to have safety and nourishment to even have any thought about being able to listen and start in the way of learning. So I would try to shift funds from those areas like that I mentioned, like from the social and emotional learning and these invasive surveys that are going on to school. I think you can save some money and focus that money back onto those to children that have given that breakfast and lunch. Thank you. This is kind of one of the key fundamentals that I'm so at my platform. And if you look at, I'll give you an example. I talked to a teacher here locally, and she sent a disruptive student out of the classroom and went to the counselor. The student came back into the classroom with a lollipop in their mouth. And that sends a message to the teacher that the counselor or administrators don't really care about having a manageable classroom. It reinforces bad behavior in the student who was sent out and come back with a lollipop. And it tells the other students that obviously they don't care about discipline in the school, and some of them actually may be afraid, because if it was a bully, for instance, or who's regularly disrupting students, then that's going to cause problems in the way of safety. I was at a Hopewell town hall meeting last year, and parents, it didn't make any difference what their race, white, black, Hispanic, teachers, they all stood up and complained about the lack of discipline, because they say it's the same troublemakers who are causing disruption in the classroom and making other students afraid. So I think we need to look again about the safety, because you need to set discipline. I'm sorry. You need to set expectations, because if you lower the bar that anybody can get away with anything, then that's what you could probably get. So that's one of the things that teaching, well, in any field of expectations, you want to higher the expectations of behavior, and I think you can start getting a safe school. It's not going to be an overnight thing, don't get me wrong. I mean, just in our local, up in District 1, there's some very high performing schools, but if you look at the data or the data from the CMS website, you'll see that they have a lot of high absentees, and the high absentees is obviously going to be an indicator that people are not the students are not in the classroom and learning. Because I know that even when I was teaching, let's say geometry, which was one of my subjects, if a student misses a week or is regularly absent on the quiz days or test days, they can, a lot of times they can't catch up, and it's and that's going to bring down the whole school system, or that particular school, if there's a lot of high absentee, and a lot of times that's all in the same. For instance, like in District 1 where I'm at, you can even see that, and it's not fair. Now, what's happening? Why are these students missing? It could be they're afraid of school. It could be that their parents are not bringing them to school. Particularly, this would be very concerning if it's in the elementary and middle school where there's, maybe there's not someone where there is usually a parent or a guardian there with them. So that would be, that would be something that would be concerned about. The other part about when we're thinking about the failing schools in different parts of the district, in addition to the if you look at the discipline and the absenteeism, I think we need to go back and look at that. Are we focusing on the 3 R's? In other words, the reading, the writing, and math. When I look at what's going on, I think I get back to the 2 areas. One is that is the discipline. There is not sufficient discipline to set standards of behavior for the children, and I think that's linked in also with the high absenteeism with certain schools. And I think those 2 linked together, I think is going to come a long ways in improving that. And like I mentioned earlier, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. I think that's going to be a big thing. And I think it may be something that if we could spin this thing a little bit more about getting more vocational in there, that may get more actual parents, involvement and getting away from, I say the social emotional learning, which is it's always more getting into their heads about, what am I, and etc. When we really ought to be focused on, hey, we're all God's children. God loves us all, and we should love each other. And I think if we could keep that message, that the thing of virtues and self-reliance, I think is going to go a long way in improving all of our schools, with particularly in all the districts. I don't think it's in that, but I think that's the key thing, because it's great, and I think we ought to, like I mentioned earlier, we ought to keep these the community schools, because I think if we can, that's going to bring in hopefully more and more parents involved in the whole thing. So I hope that answers your questions there.
My name is Amani Fisher. I am running for school board representative District 1. And I am so glad that you allow me to be here with you all today. And I want to say thank you for listening in and entertaining what I have to say here today. I am running for school board District 1 because of the fact that I am concerned about our families. I am concerned about the education of our students, and I'm concerned about the effect that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is having on our community. I am a father of 3 young men that have matriculated through Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. I actually have one that is still a junior, but I have 2, one that has just graduated from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a junior at Virginia Tech Poly Institute. And then I am also a community leader. I moved to Charlotte-Mecklenburg area about 17 years ago, where I inherited about 3,500 students because I was the senior director of student development at New Birth Charlotte. And at that time, with my responsibilities, it was so imperative that I advocated for families, I advocated for children. I was in the school system. That's where I developed my partnership with Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I also was able to navigate and speak with teachers and get familiar with the atmosphere in the various schools in the North Charlotte area. I am a graduate of Morehouse College and the son of two lifelong educators. Matter of fact, my father is still teaching early childhood education at Borough Manhattan Community College. And so I understand, because I was raised and trained with the value of education in my home. I'm a graduate of Morehouse College, and we understand that advocacy as well as being a representative of your community is very, very important. I am running on accountability, transparency, and restored confidence, which is so very important. Accountability for our school system, but there's also accountability at this point right now. When we look at the school performance, with 81 of our schools receiving D and F grades, and then we have 50 low performing schools, I believe that we have to teach a full history, and I believe that we have to have inclusion of many different aspects to have a holistic student. But I'll be honest with you, as a school board representative, my first goal is to make sure that we are teaching our children the core curriculum. This is what we're being graded on. These are the items that the state is looking for to make sure that our children are career and college ready. It's very, very imperative that our children are career and college ready and they receive the endorsements. We have a disparity between African-American as well as Latino students receiving the endorsements after they graduate, as well to our Caucasian counterparts. I am for all students, but I am for students that are being educated to the top tier education that they are supposed to receive. And so I believe in a village approach. There are some items where I believe parents and the village can train and teach our children. And as educators, it's imperative that we educating our children on these core curriculum values, like reading, arithmetic, like STEM sciences and in history, a totality of history, not just an abbreviated history, but a totality of history. And so I would like to introduce a policy or committee where we are able to have our community be a part of the curriculum development and the different books and items that will be in our school. I believe what we can do is we can represent what our community wants by having the input of our community. Well, the reality is this: we have to teach history as history was, because the thing about history, it will teach us lessons that we do not want to repeat. It'll teach us some lessons that we want to repeat, but it'll also teach us lessons that we do not want to repeat. And so we need to get an authentic history from all perspectives. We need to make sure that there's an authentic history and we're telling everybody's story. I am a firm believer that if we can tell everyone's story, then we can learn and be better citizens. One of the goals of education, true education, as Dr. King says, is not only intelligence, but teaching character. History will teach us these things. And so we have to have a total history of an accurate history. And so that's why I was saying before in my past comment that it's important that we get the input of our community, because our community understands history. I do not believe in history that is going to tear down one group to raise up another, but I believe in an accurate history, a history that is telling the entire story so that we can all get an accurate view of where we've come from and an accurate view of things we do not want to repeat. The school bus problem is an overwhelming problem that is actually indicative of all of our schools. When we look at the beginning of the school year, we had 390 vacancies in our CMS system. I believe it starts with leadership. I believe it starts with leadership that will build a culture. And we build the culture of CMS through our policies that come from the school board, but then also through through the picking of a new superintendent and what will come down from the superintendent's office, as well as he builds a team out. And so I believe the school bus issue is a part of a work morale. I believe it's a part of not valuing our school bus drivers. We have to be competitive with our school bus drivers and make sure that they are being paid the value of what they do and the job performance that they will perform. I also think that we need to bring in experts that are with the CAT system, and bring in experts that have dealt with mass transit systems before, as we move our students safely through our Mecklenburg streets and through our highways and roadways. And we need to get with experts that will help us to better our school bus system. But I understand that there's a lack of employees that want to drive the school buses. And so we have to look at that system. We have to make sure we're hearing from those who are currently doing it so that we can make it better and make it more attractive, that we would have individuals who want to come to work every day and want to guide our children through our streets safely. It's one of those things that we have to take a multi-tiered approach from, and it's just not one solution, but we have to look at the different facets and why our school bus system looks the way that it does at this current state. There are both needs. We have a school right here in our district, in District 1, North Mecklenburg High School, that is one of the oldest schools in the district. And I believe some parts of that school is above repair. We need a new school. And that's a reason that we can't play politics with the education of our children, is because of the fact that, as a retribution to my understanding from an elected official here in Huntersville, that it used to be #1 on new construction, but because of politics and wanting to get back, now it's at the bottom of the list. And when we expect our children and drop our children off to be educated, they should not have to worry about rain coming through the ceiling. They should not have to worry about safety controls in the building, or old construction, and is this building going to fall apart? And so I believe that there has to be, this can't be the #1 thing, because the education and the achievement gap of our children is #1. But as you look at a whole corporation, which CMS is, we need to look at new construction, as well as we need to look at construction that just needs to be revised or updated or remodeled. And so I believe by looking at our experts that will come in and looking at the condition of buildings, we'll be able to determine that. But if we are taking funds that is given to Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, and we're more concerned about construction than the educational systems and the programs that we can put in place for our students for their achievement gap, then we need to restructure how we're doing that. So I believe that there's room for new construction, but there's also room for remodeling. But I also would say that it's very important that we're equitable and we're sharing the resources, not just in affluent areas, but we need to share the resources, because every student deserves the right to be educated in a well-designed institution and a well-designed school. I think the school free breakfast and lunch problem is indicative of our community. And we also need to get the input of our community. One thing I am running on is building that trust factor, but also active advocacy for our community. Also, this is a part of our fiscal transparency. We need to have fiscal transparency, because our school system receives money from the federal government, we receive money from the state, and we receive a lot of our money from the county commission. We need to have fiscal transparency to indicate how and track how our funds are getting from the funders that are giving it to us to every student. And we need to share that. We need to share that with our constituents and the residents. It is an indicative problem that we have with our free and reduced lunch, but I believe this is a problem that we can fix locally, but this is also an issue that we need to take to the state legislature and make sure that as a school board, we are lobbying for better policies that will fix this issue. I know this is a hot button topic, and it should be, because of the things that we have seen in our past. Safety is a very important issue, but it's not just physical safety, but it's emotional safety. One thing that we need to do is we need to start instituting policy that can be executable in a school. We need to build wraparound services to help to gauge the mental stability of our students. I do know that there are different policies and there are different tests that are administered throughout the year, but we also need to do more so that we can understand the mental state of our students. We need to engage our parents and understand what are some of the barriers that our students are facing emotionally at home. But we also need to take assessments. So what do we need to, what do I suggest? I suggest that we hire more counselors and we hire more social workers, and we have our families instituted and built in that they can also help us with the safety of our buildings. Again, the community understands what it takes to keep our children safe. We have resident experts that can come in and help us out with this. We don't have to recreate the wheel, but what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are taking care of short-term risk, but also long-term risk. When we are building a better student with the emotional safety, then it would minimize the risk of our safety in our schools. But I do agree with some of the things that the school board has come around with, because I was a student in New York and I understood about the metal detectors, but we cannot treat our children like they are only and solely in a jail. These are just frontline things that we need to have, but we also need to make sure that they have a safe environment by some of the other aspects of our school. The thing about it is this, I used to pastor in the West Charlotte area, and I live in Huntersville. And I could not understand how the schools that I was working with in the West Charlotte area were different from the schools that I take my children to. And so in being in the same district. So it showed me that there were disparities in offerings that were happening in our schools. And I believe even in District 1, there are disparities that happen in our schools. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're incentivizing teachers to go to some of these schools. We need to make sure we're not penalizing teachers because it's harder in this area because of the inequitable resources that are in a school to train up a child and to educate a child. We need to across the board look at the school system and look at the schools that our teachers are teaching in and basically incentivize them for that. We cannot use certain schools because of problems in the school as a stepping stone to get to another school. But we have to do better to make sure that there's a baseline equity of resources for each and every school. There are disparities, and I believe there are disparities because of the approach that we have in the community. And I go back to this sentiment, it takes a village to properly educate a child. And so if we have to make sure that we're getting out of the schools and getting and hearing our community, that they would make sure that when their child comes to school, their child is ready to learn, then we need to do that. In some of the schools that I believe that there are disparities, needs to be greater wraparound services. I used to run a program called Family Nights in the West Charlotte area. And what we would do is we would build a family night. The number one problem that I see in my district is something that I'm running on. And I'll be honest with you, there's a breakdown of the tripod of education. What do I mean by that? Tripod of education is the student, the parent, and the educator. There's a breakdown of that tripod of education. And I believe because there's a breakdown of that relationship between those three entities, you're getting a lot of the things that are coming at teachers where parents are not understanding. Students are not wanting to be at school. We have great absenteeism in our school, and we have to build and mend that relationship that these three people groups are working together for better education. I believe when these three people groups are working better for education, we would not have failing schools in our district. And we would not have some schools that are excelling more and schools that are not excelling at all. But we would build advocacy for parents, and they would understand what's actually going on in the school. And we would hear what they want from the school system, and the school system will be able to hear what they want from parents so that the children do not lose out. And so we have to build this bridge of trust and relationship so that we can all work together to get a better District 1 as well as a better CMS. I believe when we start there, then we can tackle some of these other insurmountable things that are happening. We have failing schools in our school system. More than half of our school system is failing. We have 50 low-performing schools in our entire school system, and we see that reflected in District 1. We cannot think that these things that are touching the whole are not touching our district, and we need to come against those things, combat them, and bring innovative solutions to these.
Good evening. I'm Rhonda Cheek, formerly elected as Rhonda Lennon. I did get married in 2018 to my amazing husband, and we have now welcomed in our fourth grandchild. It's been an exciting week. I chose to run for re-election because I felt that there was a lot of work left to be done, and we are not where we should be as a district. And I felt called to continue. I became an advocate for CMS when my children entered the system. All three of my children have gone from kindergarten through 12th grade and graduated. I started being a PTA volunteer back in 1996 and kind of worked my way around several PTA boards in Northern Mecklenburg County. I started an advocacy group in 2003 because I thought we were not really being represented well in the bonds and getting new schools built in the suburbs, and we had severe overcrowding, and that group kind of led me to serving on several other education committees. And when time rolled around for a school board candidate to step up, I decided I was ready. So I ran and was elected in 2009, and I've been reelected twice by the citizens in District 1. I'm known as a team player, as a relationship builder, and as a consensus builder, because anything we do on the board is going to take you working with other people, no matter where they're from and what their background is. And we have to be able to do that. We also have to have good leadership, and we have to have great communication. And I do both of those in my district on a regular basis. I communicate with a multitude of people. I've lived in Mecklenburg County for over 40 years, and it is my home. And I care deeply about our schools. In addition to my own three children, my niece and nephew are CMS graduates. My husband's actually a CMS graduate, as I am as well. So CMS matters to me, and that is why I chose to run. And I hope to continue my common sense, statesmanship, and working on solutions kind of leadership to the school board for another term. Thank you. I don't believe we should remove or ban books from libraries or from the classrooms, particularly unless I guess in the classroom we need to have age appropriate material, but I don't believe in banning or removing or censoring books. But I do want to make sure that parents are knowledgeable about what their children are doing and have an active role in that. And by that, I think that parents need to have informed, intentional informed consent on any books that might have questionable content so that they're involved. If a parent is involved in their children's education, it's always going to be a benefit. So I do want parents to have a voice in that and not make the decisions for them. But I do not believe in banning books. And I'm glad that you asked this. I believe that we should, number one, teach a historically accurate curricula. And by that, I don't mean whitewashing things. I don't mean adapting facts to common myths. I mean the real stuff. And sometimes that's the hard stuff, and that's the scary stuff. And that's the stuff that makes us have real, challenging, but insightful conversations with the people around us that don't all look like us. We need to tell the truth, and we need to have our children learn the truth. We need this to be the generation that doesn't get the sugar-coated version of some of the American events that have happened over the last several decades, centuries actually. And so I believe that we need to teach a historically accurate curriculum. And then secondarily, We need to have a culturally relevant curriculum. I don't want to go to stop by a personal finance class or maybe a business class and have nothing but white male CEOs as role models for the students. I need people that look like you and I and others to be the role models, and in the books and in the textbooks and in the books that children are learning to read in kindergarten. I want them to open a page and see themselves in everything they do. So that's kind of where I stand: culturally relevant and historically accurate. That's where I'm all about. Great question. I had a call about that from a constituent today. I've got one neighborhood up here that's really struggling. We have raised the pay for bus drivers. It's a serious problem. It's a shortage of drivers, and it's not just us. Charlotte, I think it's called the CATS bus system. They're also having a serious shortage of drivers. It's not just about money, but we are doing a better job now that we've gotten the pay scale up. We're recruiting better. We had less openings than we did a year ago when school started. So streamlining, making sure we're getting out to the communities and making sure we're getting a robust and diverse group of people that want to drive our buses is essential. We need to be really organized and methodical in what we do in our buses. I do think that the bus app is great for parents when it's working right. But I had a parent today that raised a really interesting question to me, and it was about kindergarten students, and her son is a new rider on the bus and doesn't have any older siblings. He's the one and only in that family. And this little boy was very scared on the bus, was very unfamiliar with him. And the bus drivers at this point don't really know who's the new ones on the bus, who the kindergartners are. And this mom and I had a great conversation about that, and we kind of talked about different options. I said, maybe, kindergartners need to wear like a bright yellow lanyard on the bus for the first few weeks while they're still learning. So the bus driver knows maybe who needs a little extra care and a little extra special attention to get around and make sure they're safe. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. Training is always going to be crucial. Professional development, even for our bus drivers, is crucial. So recruiting, paying them well, retaining them, and making them have good working conditions are all essential. And then we have to have good leadership at the top to make sure that we're maintaining our buses properly and that we have the bus routes as accurate as possible. Thank you. That's right up my alley. I'm so glad you wanted to talk about school construction. There's a fine line. We needed to replace schools when they are at the end of their life cycle. We also need to build schools when we have super high levels of crowding. And in the same place, we need to make sure we're doing the preventative maintenance on schools that are newer so that they don't wear out faster than they should. And we're being good stewards of the taxpayer money. So preventative maintenance, and then just kind of the routine kind of maintenance like you have to do at your house. You have to paint, you have to fix the gutters, you have to maybe change your windows out, get new floors, get a new HVAC unit as your house ages. So we need to be doing preventative, we need to be doing the routine maintenance, and then we need to make sure that when we have reached the end of a life cycle for a school, that we are replacing it. So there's got to be a very good mix, and we do have a rubric now that kind of measures, how safe is a school, because overcrowding and poor conditions can lead to safety issues. So it's a combination of new construction, of renovations of current buildings, and sometimes just straight up tear downs and replacement. Like we just did at West Charlotte, like they're planning to do, I know, at Cornelius Elementary, which is it's a building that my stepfather, who is 89 years old, actually went to kindergarten through 12 at the Cornelius facility. So parts of the building are very old, and it's not worth repairing at a certain point. I think the tipping point for the cost of when you just tear down a building instead of trying to renovate it is when the renovation costs are 80% of the cost of a new building. Then it's time to go ahead and take that building down and put up a new structure. Our children from the top of the county to the bottom, from the east to the west, in every zip code, in every neighborhood, they need quality schools. They need to have schools that are maintained properly, and they need to have schools that have the renovations done as needed as well. So we need to make sure that we're honoring both maintenance and renovations and new construction in a very fair way. That is a federal government issue right now. And I was actually part of the legislative group that lobbied a lot to make sure that we settled some of the federal nutrition program down. Right now, schools that have a high poverty level are considered a full Title I school, and every student in that school is entitled to free breakfast and free lunch without any paperwork. But what the problem we have is the federal government reinstated some of their free and reduced lunch paperwork that hasn't been necessary for the last few years for us to do. I think the only way to solve that is we have to make sure children get signed up when they need it, because I cannot fathom how troubling that is to think the child wouldn't have food, and we're not going to let that happen. So we have to be really resourceful and make sure that we're getting out to families, especially language barriers that might be there, or parents that just are not really engaged with the school. So we need to make sure that we have our staff actually reaching out to parents of families that we know really need to be a part of that program and help them in that process. Literacy is an issue. Language barriers are an issue. And I don't want a child not to be signed up for free and reduced lunch program just because the parents weren't able to fill out the paperwork properly. So that's where we have to work as a village, and we have to tap into groups like your group or our faith community to help us get families in touch and connected to be able to fill out the paperwork for their children. I'm a huge supporter of childhood nutrition in general, and childhood hunger is to me one of the most devastating things. So I also love a lot of our groups that we have, a lot of church and faith groups we have in our community. They actually are doing backpack programs for children that they know that are in need, and they send home things like jars of peanut butter and certain food items with them over the weekend. So those children will still have nutritional support even when they're not in our school. But we have to know that some of our kids only get good meals when they're at our schools, and that's something that we need to do better. Thank you. I love your questions. All right, let me get started. I was probably the most outspoken advocate for safety. When we came back to school last year, 2021, we just had kids that they had forgotten how to do school. They had forgotten how to sit in a classroom and how to be orderly and how to walk in the hallways. And they had lost their way. And so we had to really crack down. And I think everyone will know that we've seen a huge change in behavior. We have not seen the problems with guns and with violence. You know, we've had some isolated fights here and there, not going to say it's perfect, but we haven't seen the overall problems we had a year ago. Some of the things that I was most, that I advocated for the biggest were the body scanners. I think that they're working great. They're rolling out now in all middle and high schools. I think that there's probably some reason to look at them for elementary, because some of our biggest mass shootings have actually been in elementary schools. But some of the things I want us to make sure we're being very vigilant with, and this is for the staff, and the staff has so much on them, but the keeping buildings secure is their responsibility when they're there. So, you know, I need parents and volunteers to understand that they might have to go through additional screening. They might have to wait outside and get buzzed into the school. The doors aren't open anymore to our schools. And that's sad, but we need to make sure still that they're welcoming to people that are safe to come in. So those are two of the big things. We also need to make sure that when we're building our new buildings or we're renovating buildings, and even when we're doing maintenance, that we're doing the right things. You know, what if a school door system isn't working properly? That should be a top priority because it's a safety issue. We also need to make sure that students that just cannot follow the rules are removed from the classroom so that their other students in the classroom and our staff are safe. So we cannot have students that are being extremely disruptive and unsafe in the classroom. We have to take care of that. And that's where we have to get parents involved. We have to get outside groups involved. The court system has to be involved in some cases. And we need to do the right thing for these kids to try to give them a place to learn that's safer for them. That's a huge problem. And it's, you know, we also see performance disparities within a school in different demographic groups. So that is going to be, the achievement gaps are really our biggest hurdle that we have to be working on. It takes laser focused administration. It takes curriculum consistency. We have such high mobility in our schools, especially in our high poverty schools, children moving from school to school during the school year. In the past, we had a lot of variable curriculum from school to school, but now we have a consistent curriculum in both language arts and math from school to school. What we are telling teachers, though, is and principals and leaders that know their school is they need to take that curriculum and they need to teach it to their kids so that they're in the best way for their students. What's right on one side of the road may not be the same for the other side of the road. So we need to make sure that our staff that is trained to work with their kids and the staff that knows those kids is addressing any special needs that are needed. And we really need just an all hands on deck mentality with our academic core, and it's our core. I don't want us to ever teach to the test. I want us to teach the subjects. And if we teach the subjects of reading and math, our students will do well on their exams or do better. So a big thing that's going on now that I think is, it's kind of funny. Somebody talked about our innovation in our reading program. Really what the innovation is we're using the 1930s phonics curriculum, kind of back to the basics and doing phonics with students and decoding. And that's something I think a lot of parents can relate to. And I would also say that we need to make sure that we have opportunities for parents and adult literacy in this community. The biggest thing that we can do for any child is to make sure that when they get home that their parents engage with them, and from the time they're a newborn baby, they need to have somebody that will read with them every day. Those kind of things will change their trajectory for the future. I would have said school safety a year ago, but things have improved. I think overall engagement of the community and families and students. So I would say use the word engagement. We've got to have kids be engaged, we have to have parents be engaged, and we have to have staff be engaged. So I would say that that's not necessarily a problem, but it's something that we have to continue to strive for and make sure that we are having welcoming schools, that we have staff that feels cared for and respected and valued, and that we have students that know that school can be the safe harbor for them and the safe place for them to not just learn, but to, like I said, get their nutrition, to talk to adults that may be there to help them with problems they're having at home or in their personal life. So I just want to make sure that we're engaged in every way. Intentional engagement is the key. We have to do it. We can't just say we're engaged. We have to have staff that reaches out to kids, that notices the kids. I heard a school the other day that was kind of doing, they had each freshman kind of had an adult that was assigned to them that was kind of keeping an eye on them. And they were really just trying to make sure that they were kind of just fitting into the day, and they looked like they were okay. And they didn't have, if they had a question, they knew which adult in the school they could go to. So I think that that's the key. We need engaged families, we need engaged kids, we need engaged staff members, and we need an engaged school board, and we need an engaged administration. And if all those parts are rolling together and we keep ourselves laser focused on doing what's right for students and children in this county, I think that then our hearts will be open to doing the things that we need to do that are the right thing for students. So it's really about being engaged and focusing on what's the best thing for children.
Thank you for giving me the time to speak, and I very much appreciate the Mecklenburg NAACP to give me this platform to share my ideas with you. So I appreciate that. My name is Melissa Easley. I'm actually a 14-year veteran teacher in CMS. 5 of those years were spent in the suburbs of Chicago, and actually Chicago proper for a little bit. And then I moved out here, and I've been the last 10 years in CMS in our 3 of our Title I schools that are in CMS. So I taught social studies and science, and I left the classroom in 2001 and decided that it was time to make a difference in policy, in what I can do for our students. I've also been an educational advocate for the last 7 years. I co-founded and run North Carolina Teachers United, which is the largest pro-public education platform in the state. And so I have continued to advocate for not only teachers, but students, not only in Mecklenburg, but across the state as well. So I've made a lot of connections in Raleigh, I've made a lot of connections in Mecklenburg, and I plan to use those connections to make sure that our students in CMS continue to move forward. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and it's going to take all of us working together to accomplish our goals. Absolutely not. I mean, I was an educator. My profession, that's what my master's degree is in. That is what I'm a national board certified educator. Like, books are the cornerstone to our education. We should not be censoring. We should not be banning. We should not be doing any of that with any of our books in our library. Absolutely not. In fact, I was on several of the committees that voiced opinions in regarding our social studies standards, because I taught social studies and science, and so absolutely not. You know, the basic term of just denying of what actually happened in both science and history and making sure that, we are showing our children that, some of the things that you may have heard of may not have been, what really happened. And we are responsible for telling our kids what really happened and who really is responsible for many of our inventions and many of our, accolades that we have today. There's a lot going on with the school bus. And I understand that when you say school bus problem, that's a very big umbrella, and that each of you may have different aspects of what's going on the school bus. My children ride the school bus every day. They are elementary school kids at one of the North Mex schools up here. And so, yeah, the school bus issues are very concerning. And the first one that needs to be addressed is our drivers. We are short-staffed, just like we are across the state. Teachers and educators across, not just Mecklenburg, but across the country. We are short bus drivers. And so our bus drivers are driving 2, 3, 4 routes. They're exhausted. Obviously, as you become more and more exhausted, as you're driving and driving and driving, your patience becomes a little bit more thin. And so there is a lot that goes into this. We need to make sure that we have adequate busing. We need to make sure that our stops are safe. We need to make sure that we look at how far kids are being bused, and why they're being bused. Busing kids across county for no reason, it does not need to happen. So there are a lot of angles that we need to look at, and I look forward to hearing different aspects of people that have dealt with bus issues, not only from my views, but from others as well. There's a fine line to walk between here. And because there is something that it is more cost effective to repair something as opposed to build a whole building. If there's small repairs, they're minor repairs, that is absolutely, that's the way we should go. And we should make sure that we're repairing it correctly and not putting a Band-Aid on it. The other route, though, is that many of our schools are 80, 90 years old, or at least pushing around there. And the electrical is out of date, and the HVAC system is completely out of date. And so when it becomes more cost effective to build the new school, that's when we have to sit down and say, okay, what are all of the issues? What can we repair? And will that be as cost effective? Will that be more cost effective than building a new school? And so we also, there's other aspects, who will feed into that school? How long will it take? Where are we going to put things? How the bus is going to get, all of that. There are a lot of aspects that go into that. But we really need to sit down and be critical in what we can repair safely and correctly. I think that's the key word here, is correctly and not just a Band-Aid, versus what we have to do. And if there's too many problems to fix it all at once, and it would be cost effective, and it would be better for our students, instead of repairing a 90-year-old building, to brand a new one. Most of that funding comes from the state. And so as a CMS board member, I need to be able to be strong enough to advocate for those funds. During COVID, when we had, the last couple of years, where we had all of our students for breakfast and lunch, that was special COVID funds that did run out, and the our national government decided not to refund those. So that's where we have to come back to the county and the state, and we need to make sure that our, what I consider wraparound services, which is our free lunch and free breakfast for all of our students, we need to make sure that that is still happening, because a lot of more than 50% of our families rely on that to feed their children. And so that is an incredible need that needs to stay. And if I have not heard that the state is looking to cut that funding, but that is not saying that they're not talking about it. So if that's the case, then it is our job, not only as board members or as educators, but community members, to make sure that say that no, that is not something that should happen, that we need to make sure that these programs continue to be funded. like to talk about this twofold. When someone asks me that question, the first thing in their mind is the physical safety of our kids. And absolutely, we have made strides. I don't think we have made enough strides, but I do understand that because of financing and all of things that we might have to do this in stages. But there are multiple layers to physical safety in the schools, and that is, in our middle and high schools, those are our gun scanners, and making sure that our staff is trained in how to, approach a student if there's a concern or things like that. We need to have multi-level. We need to have our counselors. Putting counselors in there is going to be a huge thing. Once again, that is a wraparound service that I consider to help all of our students. And so those are things over the last several years to grow as a human being. And so, it's a part of the school's job to make sure that those students have a safe environment, not only be from the physical outside in our buildings and things like that, but their mental aspect as well, and social emotional growth and things like that. So I think that question is definitely twofold, and continuing the physical buildings and looking at how we can promote buildings, but making sure that we're also preparing our students emotionally and mentally as well. There's a lot of issues that go on there. And honestly, if we were going to talk candid here, that those schools that are failing or given an F or, things like that, they're in high poverty areas. And, we need to call it out when we see it, and we need to say, okay, how can we do to fix this? And so, we've got bias tests that should not be, that really should not be the only point of data between growth. And I like to point this out and share a story, is that I had a student that came in to one of my classes at a third grade reading level, the seventh grader, third grade reading level. And his team of teachers, including myself, we worked really hard with them. He worked really hard. He wanted to learn. We helped. He got discouraged. It was a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from the student and from his teachers. And he grew 2 levels. He left seventh grade reading at a fifth grade reading level. But because he didn't get to a seventh grade reading level, he was considered a failing student. And that is absolutely not okay, because he worked so hard to grow 2 grades. His teachers worked so hard to grow him 2 grades. And so we should not be just taking these end of year tests as the only data point. We need to be looking at the whole child, because CMS has adopted the whole child learning philosophy. We need to be analyzing our child on the whole growth, on the whole child as well. Growing 2 grade levels in 1 year is a significant thing. And we worked really, really hard, and so did him. So, we really need to relook at how we use our data and where we get our data from. And just because one didn't grow 4 grades, but they grew 2 grades, they still should be celebrated and acknowledged. I don't know which one would be the number one problem. Honestly, there are so many issues in different paths that I don't think one is necessarily one important to the other. CMS, 50% of our kids across the district are on free or reduced lunch. They are low poverty. We are one of the only districts across the country that is a Title I district. We need to be working together to make sure that all of our students get the equity and the equality of education that they deserve. And I think some of the disparities, we think we're by ourselves. Each individual district tries to work independently, and that's not how it has to work. So we need to first work together. Another issue, our faith in the community and the school board is a mess. It needs to be restored. The school board needs to restore their faith to the Black community, to our parents, to our educators, to our students. And so we need to work really, really hard, and we need to work collectively. And whoever is on this new board that's coming up needs to be able to put things aside, work collectively to make sure that our biggest issues, teacher retention, student achievement, our culture in CMS, all of that needs to be fixed. And I think, if I'm going to pick one word, it's our culture. And I don't think it's singled out just in District 1, though it is definitely there. I think it's across the district.
My name is Ro Lawson. I am running for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools School Board District 1, and that is located up in the North Mecklenburg area. That includes parts in around 485, Huntersville, Cornelius, and Davidson. I have 3 kids in CMS, 2 that just recently graduated from Huff High School, the twin boys that are now in a freshman at NC State. And I have a daughter that is a 10th grader at Huff High, and she is a sophomore and will be hopefully getting through this challenging year because she's taking a lot of courses. But the reason why I'm running for CMS School Board District 1 is on 3 issues. 1, safety. In light of what happened last year of the 30 guns that were confiscated on CMS campuses, I think more needs to be done with regards to really focusing on safety in and around our schools, because if parents aren't confident that their children are attending a safe school, then that takes away a lot of their confidence on whether or not their children in particular, are going to be in a safe environment, not to mention the teachers and the administrators and principals. So what I want to try to introduce is vulnerability studies to take a look at each and every school, starting with my district and hopefully in the rest of the district, to find out if there's any vulnerabilities and loopholes that we need to tidy up. Second, and most importantly, student outcomes. Over 50 schools from CMS just got a grade of D or F from the state, and that's unacceptable. And when over 60% of 3rd graders aren't reading at a proficient level, something drastic needs to be done, because we continue to kick that can down the road and getting either the same or worse results. My position is, if the curriculum allows books that aren't going to add to the educational value of children, then I don't feel they have a place in the schools. Now, with regards to censorship, that's a fine line of trying to walk with regards to, is removing books or censoring books from our students hindering their educational progress. And once that threshold has been crossed, then that's where I have a problem. I'm all for allowing books to be introduced to our students if they're going to contribute to the educational value. Growing up, I had the classics such as To Kill a Mockingbird, just to name one significant book that right now isn't being used, and instead being replaced with books that may or may not be controversial, more importantly, appropriate for students, and whether in the middle school level or in the high school level. So with regards to looking at those books that may or may not be controversial, my biggest concern is, does it pass the threshold if it's going to improve their educational progress, if it's going to be in line with helping them read, write, and do arithmetic? Because right now, 3rd graders, if we can break this down, I mentioned it earlier, are not reading at a proficient level. Over 60%, 82% of Black and Hispanic 3rd graders aren't reading at a proficient level. And so it's my concern and interest to make sure that the right books are in place for those students so that they will maximize their educational experience, learning how to read and progressing along, so that once they are advancing, they've got the skills that are needed from these books that are enhancing their reading experience. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to get them to do, is to read, write, and do math. I think if they are injecting opinion versus fact, then I think that's where conflict arises. With regards to teaching history, every type of history, being an Asian American, African American studies, each and everything that's led our country to where we are, good and bad. I mean, this is no perfect country. There's no perfect scenario in which we can believe that our history is a guide to how we should teach our kids. And for those non-historians that are introducing history that isn't factual, then I would rather stick with history as it's taught. And whether or not there's any amendments to that it has to be in line with what the historical references are being taught. So with respect to looking at any change in history or any misalignment, my views with regards to history is using the history that was given to us. Now, is it the right history? That can all be very subjective, but I try to use, having been in the military, but using just facts and sticking to the facts, that the history that we've been given and taught, not that it can't use any type of change or adjustment, but as long as we stick to the facts and stick to the history that has shaped us, not that we can't learn from it, but using historical facts, I think, is more important and takes precedence over non-historians trying to interject their belief or their opinion, because again, at the end of the day, if it's their opinion or beliefs, then it's not factual. So that's where I stand with regards to history and non-historians. Not only are we having a problem with bus drivers, but we've got a problem with teachers. Starting the school year in 2022, 2023, we're short 400 teachers. And I think we're short about 100 bus drivers right now in CMS. One, I think, obviously, making a safe environment for our bus drivers, and as well as a attractive wage that they can earn, trying to bus safely our students. The school district has actively been engaged in job fairs to try and recruit new bus drivers. I really think that there has to be a infrastructure in place to try and make those bus drivers that are currently working for CMS stay, and make sure that they've got the support, they've got the economic structure in place, so that they are in line with whatever market conditions can offer a bus driver, along with making sure, because not related to CMS, but there is some safety issues with CATS drivers, and whether or not and their safety has been transferred to those bus drivers wanting to drive for CMS, thinking, okay, well, maybe we might not be as safe, because if CATS drivers aren't safe, then maybe CMS might not be a good option for them. And so, and the biggest things I want to try to do is provide a safe environment for them, attractive wage, and this infrastructure and support to allow them to safely bring our kids to school. And more importantly, keep that line of communication open, especially from administration, the school board, and doing everything we can to give them the resources needed to properly do their job. And hopefully with those adjustments, we can attract new bus drivers to fill this shortage that we're currently experiencing. The use of funds for new schools versus the repair of existing schools has to be a joint effort between the community, between the school board, and between operations within CMS, looking at, one, just because a district or a community wants a new school doesn't mean that they can get it, because a lot of things have to go into play. One, is there even room for a new school? Up in District 1, they haven't received any new schools, and that's a concern from many parents. But there's older schools that can be renovated, and if not built bigger and enlarged and expanded. So I think looking at the needs of each and every district should take precedence over just a rubber stamp, hey, you're going to get this money to build a new school. There's so many factors that go into it, but in particular, my school district, I know schools in Cornelius are going to look at, based on the property that they're currently located on, they're going to go ahead and build better. They're going to renovate, they're going to expand, just because, one, especially in these small towns of Huntersville, Cornelius, and Davidson, there's very little space, with the growth and the development that's been happening in the past 10, 15 years. So with respect to looking at the challenges of making new schools versus renovating old and existing schools, I think each and every school in each and every district should be treated on a case-by-case basis, because there is no rubber stamp here. There is no saying, okay, well, just because based on a need versus actual ability to build new schools should take precedence. And in particular, being in District 1, I know that there hasn't been any schools that have been on the slate for building in District 1, whether it's a matter of funding or whether it's because new schools isn't needed. I know several kids rely on that. And during COVID, I truly appreciate CMS stepping up and making sure that those homeless students, those kids that rely on either breakfast or lunch or both for their only meal a day, to be able to offer that. I think that with a budget of $2.2 billion, that those services, especially for those homeless students, still should be offered. Now, is it something where we might have to scale back based on need, based on availability of funds? I still think that there's nothing that goes, or it goes without saying, that a child needs that nutritional value he gets, or he or she gets, from either both breakfast and lunch. And if they don't have the means to try and get that just because of their economic status, then I do appreciate what CMS has done, both recently during COVID and in the past. I want to continue that, but making sure that we're doing it in the confines of those that are most in need. During COVID, I do realize that it was just given out, and much money was spent to offer these services of free lunch, free breakfast, and free lunch. But was it properly managed? I don't think so. There's a lot of things that aren't properly managed within CMS, and one of them has to be the free breakfast, free lunch service and program that's currently going on. That I think as we move out more and more from COVID and get back to whatever a sense of normalcy, we can't forget those students that rely on this program, and making sure that they receive the resources necessary to get a good meal, whether both breakfast and lunch, but then allows them to be able to function and to be able to be the top student that they and their parents are hoping for. So that's where I stand with regards to looking at the free breakfast and free lunch service, knowing that there's probably going to have to be some changes and amendments to it, but that's what I'm willing to do, and partnering with our community and looking at where the most need is and fulfilling those needs. So. That's my number one issue, safety, as I mentioned in my opening. Being a former investigator for the Air Force, I spent 21 years in focusing on anti-terrorism, counterterrorism, and counterintelligence. I did vulnerability studies to protect both those bases in the US and overseas. And one of the biggest things that I'm already noticing, and parents are coming to me and telling me, like something as simple as playgrounds that are in the open, that are vulnerable to just any crazed man that maybe wants to take advantage and hurt our students and our children. Maybe introducing some landscaping, bushes. That is all part of what I'm trying to introduce with regards to safety, is conducting vulnerability studies at each and every school, at least in my district, so that because based on all the terrible and tragic events that happened recently at Uvalde, I don't want that happening in our towns. I don't want it happening anywhere in CMS, much less in District 1. So what do I want to do? I want to go ahead and conduct these vulnerability studies and partner with each and every school and get a professional, whether it's former military or experts that are going to help find these potential holes in our safety plans and security plans, and go out and actually make an assessment. And then with each school, take those back to both the principal as well as the school board and say, look, this is what we need to make these schools safer. And it could be something, again, as I mentioned, as bushes and making our children harder targets. Maybe it's, adding thermal video. So, because right now, many of the schools, both high school and middle school, have brought in body scanners. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I want to take it a step further and use technology such as thermal video that's going to detect a weapon on a student even before they get close to the school, whether exiting the bus or exiting their vehicle. So this is one of many things: vulnerability studies, thermal video, partnership with the community. Many parents from schools up in where I live, up in District 1, said they're willing to fund these little minor improvements to the schools. And so I think it's a community effort, but I want to be solutions oriented and make sure that we come up with a plan that each and every school, both the students and the staff, are all safe. And that's what I hope to do once I'm elected. That is a very tough issue because no school should be judged like another school. I'll take my district right now. District 1, the test scores, the student outcomes is better than many of the other districts within CMS. And so is it fair to go ahead and judge those schools and their performance based on another school, say like in District 2 or District 3? I don't think it is. I think each school should be judged and rated based on its individual merit, meaning why are the students not performing up to the standards that have been set both by CMS and the state? What are those factors, those limiting factors that are prohibiting or preventing our students from making the grade, from meeting the minimum standards? Because right now, schools aren't making those minimum standards. Again, with over 60% of third graders not reading at a proficient level, over 80% of Black and Hispanic third graders not reading. There is a problem here. And so what I want to take is, let's look at both the failures and the successes and try to see what is causing these schools to year after year continue to perform poorly, and maybe transfer or adjust resources or shift funding to those schools. And at the same time, for those schools, not just in District 1, but throughout the county, that there's several that are doing well. Let's take their best practices and apply it to these schools and try, and because at the end of the day, it's one town, one team. We should be all working together, knowing that each school has its own identity. It has its own share of characteristics that make that school very unique. But to go ahead and just lump them in together and saying they all should be judged by one standard, I think isn't the way to go, because then it unfairly treats and rates those schools based on a standard that may or may not apply to them. I think the number one problem in my district, hands down, is accountability, transparency, being responsive, and more importantly, being a voice and advocate for the families and especially the parents. I've had so many moms and dads come up to me that's just like, and especially considering that the current school board member has been in the seat for 13 years. And I think, thank you for your service, but it's time for a change. And that's all that parents are looking for, because while things are going and humming along, there's been incidents. Last year, there was the fights at Hopewell, and then there's been reports of sexual assault. All these things, I think, and above that, with regards to coordination between this district, the school board, the teachers and the schools, and then ultimately the community, there's been a disconnect. And because I can talk about resources, I can talk about new schools, I can talk about the pending student reassignment that's going to be coming up. But the number one and most overwhelming thing, which is the third issue as far as the things that I'm running for in my platform, is accountability and transparency and being accessible. I want to be a school board leader that takes everything that comes from the community, from the parents, and bring it back to the board, because this isn't the Roe Lawson show. This is the community, who is our number one customer. And I answer to them, I work for them. And without them and without their input, because many of them, I'm ready to set up these task forces of parents, of business leaders, of retired military, retired teachers, PhDs that all want to say, hey, Ro, how can I help? Well, the way they can help is, let's join arms together and let's go ahead and find solutions and then bring it to the board, because they can't ignore that. If it's just coming from me, that's one thing. But if it's coming from the community, which are just begging for a voice, for an advocate for them, I think that's the biggest thing that's been happening in District 1 that I'm going to change the moment that I'm elected. And I appreciate the question, and it's such a great pleasure to be here today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those interviews. Now is the time to make the decision. I pray it was a help to you. But please remember that it is so important that you vote the entire ballot. Every position is a critical position and will, in fact, direct your family. As you go through this electoral process, think back to these interviews to make the determination on what's best for you. I hope that you enjoyed this time with us. I hope you consider becoming a member of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP because we do the real work. We love you. We hope to see you soon. Please stay safe. God bless you all, and good night.